There were 14 men standing in the Harwell Motors service bay when the termination notice came down. Marcus Reeves read it last. Not because he was slow, because he had been underneath a 2019 Vantara GT for the previous 40 minutes, and the man who brought the envelope had not been willing to crouch down and hand it to him directly. He slid out from under the car, stood up, wiped his hands on the cloth he kept folded in his back pocket, and read it. The other men watched him the way people watch someone open news they already know is bad. Marcus folded the paper along its original crease and put it in his chest pocket. He went back under the car. He finished what he was doing. He tightened the last bolt. He replaced the panel. He slid out, stood, and only then walked to the sink and washed his hands with the particular thoroughness of a man who did not leave things halfway done. His son Eli was 7 years old and had been sitting on the parts shelf near the office door since 3:30, doing homework on a clipboard. When he looked up and saw his father's face, he set the pencil down. "Are we leaving?" Eli asked. "In a minute," Marcus said. He took his jacket from the hook. He collected Eli's backpack from the shelf. He said goodbye to the men who were still standing there, shook 2 hands, and walked out into the November afternoon without looking back at the building. The sign above the door read Harwell Motors, Precision Engineering, since 1987. Marcus had walked through that door for 11 years. He did not allow himself to look at the sign. He had a son watching him, and the son was going to take his cues from whatever Marcus did in the next 10 minutes, and Marcus understood that clearly, and so he walked to the truck and unlocked it and said, "Climb in. We'll get food." Eli climbed in. They drove. The Harwell Motors building sat on the southern edge of the Callaway Industrial District, a gray stretch of warehouses and fabrication plants that had been the working infrastructure of Callaway City for 40 years. The district had survived 2 recessions, 1 catastrophic flood, and the slow attrition of outsourcing that had gutted similar corridors in other cities. It had survived those things in part because of what was built inside it. Harwell Motors had not always been a prestige operation. For its first decade, it had been a mid-tier regional garage with a solid but unremarkable reputation. The transformation had begun 11 years ago when a young mechanic named Marcus Reeves had joined the staff at $16 an hour and, within his first 3 months, had identified and corrected a recurring fault in the company's flagship rebuilds that had been causing intermittent failures for 2 years. He had not announced the correction. He had simply fixed it, written a 2-page technical note explaining the root cause and the solution, and placed it on the shop manager's desk on a Tuesday morning. The shop manager, at the time, a quiet engineer named Dennis Harwell, son of the founder, had read the note twice, called Marcus into the office, and asked him one question: "Where did you learn to think like this?" Marcus had given him an answer that Dennis would repeat years later in contexts that Marcus would never directly hear about. "I don't know another way," Marcus had said. "Either the thing works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, something is wrong. You find the wrong thing. That's the whole job." Dennis Harwell had spent the next 6 years building a precision engineering division around that philosophy, with Marcus as its informal but unmistakable center. The division had won 2 regional industry citations. It had attracted 3 major corporate fleet contracts. It had produced a proprietary engine calibration method, developed across late nights and weekends, documented by Marcus in a series of handwritten technical logs, that was now the cornerstone of Harwell's market differentiation. Dennis Harwell had died 14 months ago. Cardiac event, 61 years old. He had died in his office on a Wednesday afternoon and had been found by his assistant at 5:15 when she came to tell him his car was ready. His daughter had inherited the company. Her name was Nadia Harwell. She was 34 years old, She had an MBA from Whitmore University, a consulting background, and a philosophy about operational efficiency that she had developed during 4 years of advising companies she had never worked inside. She had been running Harwell Motors for 14 months. The terminations had been her third major restructuring initiative. Marcus Reeves lived in a two-bedroom apartment on Crane Street, 12 blocks from the shop. The apartment was on the fourth floor of a building that had an elevator that worked 3 days out of 5, and a landlord who was responsive about emergencies and slow about everything else. The apartment was clean in the way that spaces are clean when the person who lives in them is organized by nature rather than by effort. Tools were stored correctly. The kitchen was functional and direct. There were drawings on the refrigerator held by small magnets. Eli's work, a shifting gallery that Marcus rotated every few weeks. He made dinner that night from what was in the refrigerator. He did not explain the termination to Eli in detail. He said that work had changed and that he would be finding something new, and Eli had accepted this with the particular resilience of a child who had learned early that his father's calm was reliable even when circumstances weren't. After Eli was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the termination notice unfolded in front of him. The language was corporate: redundancy, restructuring, position elimination. There was a severance figure that was 12 weeks of base pay, which was legally adequate and personally insulting in the way that legally adequate things often were when set against 11 years. He read it once more and then set it aside. He pulled a notebook from the shelf above the table. The notebook was one of 14 in a series he had kept since his 3rd year at Harwell. Technical logs, observations, refinements, a running record of every meaningful problem he had encountered and every solution he had arrived at. The handwriting was small and precise. The diagrams were clear. The documentation was, in a technical sense, some of the most comprehensive proprietary engineering knowledge that Harwell Motors possessed. The logs had never been scanned, had never been digitized, had never been formally submitted to the company's internal knowledge system because Harwell Motors had not had a formal internal knowledge system for most of the time. Marcus had been there. Dennis Harwell had operated largely on trust and direct conversation, and Marcus had operated the same way, and the arrangement had worked because both of them understood what they were doing. Nadia Harwell had not asked about the logs. She had not asked because she had not known to ask. She did not know they existed. Marcus looked at the notebooks on the shelf for a long moment. Then he closed the one he had opened and went to bed. Nadia Harwell arrived at the Callaway office at 7:45 the following Monday. She had been at the company's downtown headquarters for the previous 2 weeks, managing the rollout of the restructuring with her operations consultant, a firm called Meridian Advisory that she had worked with twice before and trusted with the particular confidence of someone who found external validation structurally reassuring. The Callaway service bay was quieter than she had expected. She had been told this sometimes happened after reductions, a settling period, an adjustment. She walked through the floor and spoke briefly to the remaining staff. She asked 2 supervisors about current project timelines. She reviewed the board. She noticed that 3 cars in Bay 7 had red tags on them. Red tags meant work was paused pending review or authorization. She asked the supervisor, a man named Tom Greer, who had been with the company for 8 years, what the hold was. Tom looked at the tags and then at Nadia and then at the tags again with the expression of someone who was deciding how much honesty the situation could absorb. "Those are the Vantara rebuilds," he said. "The calibration sequencing on the 3rd build is showing a misalignment in the torque mapping." Nadia waited. "We can't run the diagnostic cycle until we know which calibration template to apply," Tom said. "The standard library doesn't have the right spec for the Vantara GT engine variant. The template we've been using was custom." "Where's the custom template?" Nadia said. Tom was quiet for 1 beat. Marcus built it, he said. It was in his head and in his logs. Nadia looked at the red-tagged cars. There were 3 of them. The Vantara GT contract was one of Harwell's 3 corporate fleet accounts. The fleet account was worth approximately $2.3 million annually. Can someone reconstruct it? She says, so no more sir. Tom did not answer immediately. He had been a mechanic for 21 years. He understood what she was asking, and he understood what the answer was, and he was working out how to say it without making the morning worse than it already was. Not quickly, he said. Nadia nodded once, as though she had received operational information and had processed it and would now move to the next item. She walked back to her office. She sat down. She looked at her schedule. She did not call anyone for 11 minutes. The call from Harwell Motors came on a Wednesday morning. Marcus was in the middle of making Eli's lunch. He saw the number, recognized it, and let it ring twice before answering. It was not Nadia Harwell. It was her assistant, a woman named Priya, who spoke with the careful professionalism of someone relaying a message that had been drafted and revised. Ms. Harwell was hoping he might be available to come in and provide some technical context on the Vantara rebuild sequence. There would be a consulting fee. The dates were flexible. Marcus listened to the full message without interruption. He said, "I'll call back." He finished making Eli's lunch. He packed the bag. He walked Eli to school. He watched the boy go through the doors, the particular watch of a parent who has learned that the transition from the car to the building is a moment that deserves attention. Then he drove to a coffee shop 6 blocks from his apartment and sat for a long time with a cup he barely touched. He was not angry. Anger was a condition he had learned to observe in himself the way he observed irregularities in an engine, as information rather than as instruction. The anger was there. He noted it. He did not let it drive. He thought about Eli. He thought about the severance figure and what it covered and what it didn't. He thought about 3 red-tagged cars and a $2.3 million fleet contract and a calibration template that lived in 14 handwritten notebooks on a shelf in his apartment. He thought about Dennis Harwell, who had understood what Marcus was and had built around it rather than over it. He thought about what the right thing was. He called back. He said he would come in. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. He named a consulting rate that was precise and fair and 3 times his former hourly wage. He said it without apology. Priya said she would confirm. She called back in 20 minutes. Confirmed. He arrived on Thursday at 5 minutes to 9. He was wearing what he always wore: work pants, clean shirt, jacket. Eli had drawn a small star on the inside of his left wrist that morning with a marker before school. Marcus had looked at Eli, and said nothing, which was what he always said when Eli did something that did not require a response. The star was still there when he walked into the building. The service bay was operating, but with a different quality of motion than Marcus remembered. The men moved with the slightly elevated care of people who were not entirely certain of what they were doing and knew it. 2 jobs that Marcus would have expected to be finished were still in progress. One that should have been straightforward had a secondary issue tag on it. He saw all of this in the 30 seconds it took him to walk across the floor to the office. He did not say anything. Tom Greer met him at the bay entrance and walked with him. Tom was not a man who performed emotions he wasn't feeling, and what Marcus could see on his face was something close to relief, which said more about the week they'd had than Tom would have said directly. "She's in her office," Tom said. "You know where?" Marcus did. Nadia Harwell's office had been her father's office. She had changed the furniture and removed most of the personal items that Dennis had kept. The framed citations, the photographs, the the small model of the first engine rebuild that had put Harwell on the regional map. The office was now configured for efficiency. Clean desk, second monitor, a whiteboard with a project timeline matrix that was color-coded and current. She stood when Marcus came in, which was a choice that carried something in it. An acknowledgement of something, though she would have described it differently if asked. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Yes," he said. He sat down when she gestured toward the chair. She had a folder in front of her. The folder had printouts in it, the standard Harwell calibration library, the Vantara GT manufacturer specs, the work orders for the 3 flagged rebuilds. She slid the folder toward him. "The issue is in the torque mapping for the 3rd build. We've been running the GT variant on the standard library template. The cars are flagging during diagnostic cycle at the high load range. We need the custom calibration spec." Marcus opened the folder. He looked at the work orders. He looked at the diagnostic readouts. His eyes moved with the particular speed of someone who already knows what they're looking at and is confirming rather than discovering. He closed the folder. "The spec isn't in your system," he said. "I know," Nadia said. "I'm asking if you can provide it." "I have it," he said. "In the logs." Something moved across her face, not quite the thing she'd been maintaining since he walked in. "The logs," she said. 14 notebooks. Technical documentation from the last 9 years. The Vantara calibration is in volume 11. But you should know the other 11 contain the rest of the proprietary methodology your calibration division runs on. The room was quiet, in the way rooms are quiet when a fact has just been introduced that changes the shape of everything else in it. Nadia looked at him. He looked back at her with the patient directness of a man who had nothing to perform and nowhere to be except where he was. "Are the logs company property?" she said. "That's an interesting question," Marcus said. "Dennis and I never formalized it. He operated on trust. I operated the same way." He paused. "I came in as a consultant. You're paying me for technical context. That's what I'm giving you. The context is that the knowledge your division is built on exists in notebooks that left the building with me." He let her sit with that for a moment. Then he said, "I don't have any interest in harming the company. I have 11 men I worked with for 11 years who still work here, and I have a son who needs to know his father makes decisions he can be proud of." She did not move. "But I would like to have a real conversation," he said, "about what this place is, and what it needs, and what was lost when you made your decision last week." Another silence. A different quality this time. Not the silence of an impasse, but the silence of a person recalibrating. Nadia Harwell set her pen down. "Okay," she said. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Marcus did not perform expertise. He simply had it, and it came out the way water comes out when you open the correct valve, without pressure, without drama, simply present and continuous and going where it needed to go. He walked her through the calibration methodology, not the version that was in the standard library, the real version, the one he and Dennis had developed across late evenings and troubleshooting sessions and the accumulated, specific knowledge of 11 years of working on specific machines in specific conditions. He showed her where the standard library was an approximation and where approximation was sufficient and where it wasn't. He showed her the 3 places where the Harwell division's reputation for precision was built on methods that were not documented anywhere except in his notebooks. He was not cruel about it. He was not performing leverage. He was explaining, with the same completeness he brought to everything, what the situation was. Nadia listened. She was not the kind of person who found listening easy, and he could see that. The controlled attentiveness of someone who was more accustomed to directing conversations than receiving them. But she listened. She asked questions. Some of them were good questions, and he said so plainly when they were. Some of them revealed gaps in her understanding of the operational reality, and he addressed those without embarrassment, because embarrassment about not knowing something you hadn't been told was not rational, and Nadia Harwell struck him as a rational person who had made decisions based on incomplete information. That was a different thing from a bad person. He had been working out the difference for the past 4 days. At noon, Priya brought coffee without being asked. It was a small thing. It was also not nothing. Eli was at school until 3:30. Marcus had time. After the technical discussion, something in the room had shifted. Not all the way, but enough that the quality of the silence between speaking was different than it had been at 9 o'clock. Nadia said, "I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Why did you agree to come in?" He looked at her for a moment. "Because not coming in would have been letting the company fail to make a point. I don't make points at people's expense. Even people who fired you." Even then. She was quiet. Then, "My father talked about you. He didn't use the word indispensable often. He used it about you." Marcus said nothing. He had known Dennis respected him. He had not known the word that had been used. "I didn't read the personnel files carefully enough when I came in," she said. "I was running a restructuring model. The model identified redundant labor costs in the service division. Your position was flagged." "Because I don't have a title," Marcus said. "Because you don't have a title," she confirmed. The admission was level and without self-protection, which he noted. "The men who get titles," Marcus said, "are usually the men who asked for them. I didn't ask. I just did the work." She looked at him with something that had changed since 9 o'clock and was still changing. "That's a significant flaw in a system," she said. "A system that can't see what it can't measure." "Yes," he said. "I built that system," she said. "You built the version you inherited," he said. "You didn't build the flaw, but you're running the company now, so the flaw is yours to fix." Tom Greer found out at 2:15 when Priya called him to the main office, and Nadia Harwell told him, with Marcus sitting beside her, that Marcus would be returning not in a consulting capacity, but as Director of Precision Engineering, a new position with its own reporting line, its own budget authority, and a salary that reflected 11 years of work that had never been formally valued. Tom Greer, who was not a demonstrative man, stood very still for a moment. Then he nodded once, with the specific gravity of someone who had been waiting for the correct outcome and had not been entirely sure it was coming. "I'll tell the Bay," he said. He went to tell the Bay. Marcus could hear, from the office, the particular sound that a room makes when 14 men who have been working quietly under strain receive news that they hadn't permitted themselves to expect. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was just a change in the quality of the air, the sound of tension leaving a space. He looked at his left wrist. The star Eli had drawn was still there, faded at the edges, but there. He picked Eli up at 3:30. Eli climbed into the truck and put his backpack on his lap and looked out the window, and then at Marcus with the evaluative attention of a child who read his father carefully. "You look different," Eli said. "Do I?" "Like when something is fixed," Eli said. "Like when you fix a thing and you know it's right." Marcus pulled out of the school pickup lane. The afternoon light was coming through the windshield at a low angle, the kind of light that makes even ordinary streets look like they're worth seeing. "Something got fixed," Marcus said. Eli thought about this. He accepted it in the way he accepted most of his father's explanations, as sufficient, as true, as enough. "Can we get food?" Eli said. "We can get food." "With the good fries?" "With the good fries," Marcus said. They drove. The city moved around them in its ordinary afternoon way, unremarkable and full. At the third light, Eli looked at the inside of his father's wrist and saw the faded star and smiled without saying anything about it. Marcus saw him smile. He did not say anything either. Some things don't need to be said to be understood. The Ventara GT fleet was cleared the following Monday. All three rebuilds ran clean diagnostics within the first cycle. The calibration held at every load range. The fleet manager, a man named Carl Besson, who had been working with Harwell Motors for 6 years and had developed the particular loyalty of a client who has experienced genuine competence, called Nadia Harwell Harwell's office to say that the cars were the best work the shop had done in months. He did not know about the gap. He did not need to. What he knew was that the result was right. Marcus was in the bay when the confirmation came through. Tom Greer showed him the readout on the diagnostic terminal. Marcus looked at it once, the way he always looked at correct results, with recognition rather than surprise. "Good," he said. He handed the terminal back and went to the next car. The notebooks were never formally transferred to the company system. Marcus had a different idea about that. He spent 3 weeks, over evenings after Eli was asleep, creating a proper technical library. Not just the calibration specs, but the reasoning behind them. The full record of how each method had been developed, what problems had been encountered, what solutions had worked, and why. He wrote it the way he wrote everything, completely, without ornamentation, with the assumption that the person reading it needed to understand the thing, not just perform it. He gave the library to Nadia in a digital format and in 3 printed binders. He also kept the original notebooks. She asked why. "Because the notebooks are mine," he said. "The knowledge belongs to the company. The record of how I arrived at it belongs to me." She accepted this. It was a correct distinction. Eli came to the shop for the first time on a Saturday, 6 weeks after Marcus returned. Nadia was there, working through a set of contract reviews she'd brought from headquarters. She looked up from her desk when she heard voices in the bay. Eli was standing next to a disassembled transmission on the workbench. He was 7 years old and not yet at an age where you knew what you were looking at just by looking, but he was studying it with the complete seriousness of someone who understood that the thing in front of him was worth understanding. Marcus was beside him, explaining something in a low voice. He was using the same directness he used with everyone, not simplified, not performed, just accurate, at the level the other person needed. Nadia stood in the bay doorway. Neither of them noticed her. She watched Eli reach out and touch one of the components with 2 careful fingers, not grabbing, just making contact, asking the thing what it was through the medium of his fingertips. She thought about her father, who had had a photograph on his office wall that she had removed when she took over. The photograph was of the first engine rebuild, the one that had put Harwell on the regional map, the one that Marcus had played a significant role in. She had put the photograph in storage because it had felt, at the time, like sentiment getting in the way of clarity. She understood now that she had misread what it was. It wasn't sentiment. It was evidence. It was a record of the thing the company actually was, underneath all the spreadsheets and restructuring models and color-coded whiteboard timelines. She went back to her office. She opened the cabinet behind her desk. She found the photograph. She put it back on the wall. Marcus finished the Saturday work at 4:30. He washed his hands. He collected Eli, who had fallen asleep on the bench near the office door with his jacket over him and his shoes still on. Marcus looked at him for a moment. Eli slept the way children sleep when they feel entirely safe, boneless, complete, trusting the whole weight of themselves to the surface beneath them. Marcus picked him up. The boy stirred, made a small sound, and settled against his father's shoulder without waking. He carried him out to the truck. He set him in the passenger seat and buckled him without fully waking him. He got in on his side and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The shop windows were lit from inside. He could see the bay through the glass, the cars in their bays, the tools in their places, the work waiting for Monday with the patience of things that don't go anywhere. He had built something in that building, not alone, but in the way nothing real is built alone, in collaboration, in increments, over years, in the specific unglamorous accumulation of problems solved and records kept and standards held. It had nearly been lost, not through malice, through blindness, through the particular blindness of systems that measure what is visible and miss what is not. What mattered now was that it hadn't been. He started the truck. Eli slept on. Beside him, his head tipping slowly toward the window in the way of sleeping children who find comfort in motion. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot and drove them home through the early dark, the city laid out around them in its ordinary complexity, full of things being built and things being lost and things being found again, which is the condition of everything, and the reason, he had always believed, to keep doing the work. The star on his wrist had long since faded, but he still knew it had been there, and that was the part that stayed.